Good morning. I'm Chief Warrant Officer 4, Robert Franz, United States Army, retired. On behalf of the town of Chatham, welcome to our Veterans Day ceremony for 2018. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge our participants, members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the American Legion, and their color guard, the Chatham Coast Guard Color Guard and the Coast Guard Auxiliary. Our Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, Brownies, and their troop leaders. Our keynote speaker, sitting there all by himself, Stanley Cobain. Liam Lawless, who will be playing taps. Sarah Marcio, who will be playing bagpipes. We have members from our Chatham Police Department and Chatham Fire Department. And though he's going to get mad at me for doing this, I'd like to congratulate Deputy Chief Mike Anderson, recently promoted to Deputy Chief. He doesn't look very happy, does he? He's not happy with it. Okay, and then we have members of our Board of Selectmen. Leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance will be Hillary, or from what I understand, also known as Hilly. So Hilly, would you please come forward? Would you please stand?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sure. In 1917, President Wilson said, "This flag, which we honor and under which we serve, is the emblem of our unity, our power, our thought, and purpose as a nation. It has no other character than that which we give it from generation to generation. The choices are ours. It floats in majestic silence above the hosts that execute those choices, whether in peace or in war. And yet, though silent, it speaks to us. It speaks to us of the past, of the men and women who went before us, and of the records they wrote upon it. September 14, 1814, this flag flew proudly over Fort McHenry and inspired Francis Scott Key to write what would become known as the Star-Spangled Banner. Would you please rise and join me in the singing of our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, from standing up here and listening to you, I know we have some talented singers in our audience because I hear your beautiful voices every year. Would one or more of you please step forward and lead us in song today? Someone want to step forward and lead us in song today? Okay, I will. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam, whose bright stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallant. Go ahead, please be seated. From the opening battles of the American Revolution, the members of our military have built on a tradition of honorable and faithful service. Accordingly, on Veterans Day, our nation pays tribute to the more than 20 million living veterans who have proudly served in our armed forces. People sometimes confuse the meaning of Memorial Day and Veterans Day, two holidays established to recognize and honor the men and women who have worn the uniform of the United States Armed Forces. While Memorial Day is set aside as a day to remember and honor our military who died in the service of their country, Veterans Day is intended to thank and honor all who served honorably in the military, whether in peacetime or in war. This is a day to thank living veterans for their service and acknowledge their contributions. Up until 1954, Veterans Day was known as Armistice Day, a day that marked the end of World War I. World War I, also known as the World War, the Great War, and the War to End All Wars, took place from 1914 to 1918. During the World War, over 5 million served in our nation's armed forces. A treaty to end the war was signed to come into effect at 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918, for which reason this occasion is referred to as the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, and why Veterans Day ceremonies begin at 11 o'clock on November 11th. General John Pershing, the general of the armies at that time, was quoted as saying of those World War I soldiers, their devotion, their valor, and their sacrifice will live forever in the hearts of their grateful countrymen. The inscription on our World War monument, located out front, I can see it through that glass there, reads, "Erected in honor of the men in Chatham who left their daily task among us to serve our country during the World War 1917-1918, and in honor of those who made the supreme sacrifice. Noble in life, noble in death. May their memory inspire us to be faithful in the line of duty." Inscribed on this monument are the following names: Edward S. Bierce, Navy; Chester O. T. Eldridge, Navy; Emery F. Griffin, Navy; Herbert L. Maycomer, Army; Edwin F. Nickerson, Army; Josiah D. Nickerson, Army; Thomas J. Rogers, Army. At the time of the dedication of that memorial, few could imagine the many conflicts still to come through the years that would put further demands of duty, honor, and country on so many, much less the supreme sacrifice they would be called upon to make while in the line of duty. Today marks the 100-year anniversary of the signing of that treaty. What does it mean to be a veteran? Tears well in your eyes when you see images of a parent or a spouse holding a flag folded in a triangle. You feel positive about the next generation of future veterans to whom we have handed the baton of service. A feeling of pride when the American flag passes or during the singing of the national anthem. Understanding that peace is precious, that it has a cost, and that cost has a first name, a last name, and a middle initial. The experience leaves an indelible imprint on the soul of each individual who has served in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, or Coast Guard. It determined who we are and continues to define who we are today. Sometimes people thank me for my service. That's like thanking me for eating chocolate cake. I enjoyed my time in the military. I also know that military service isn't for everyone, and that's okay. It just happened to be right for me. There are a lot of jobs I could never do. I could never be a doctor, but thank God someone can. So what does it mean to be a veteran? Personally, I consider it an honor to have served, and I believe those I'm about to call upon do as well. If you are a veteran, would you please stand and raise your hand? As we come together to honor our nation's veterans, we realize that behind them will come a new generation of veterans. Will those serving in our armed forces today please raise your hand? We thank you. Through the generations, America's men and women in uniform have set a standard of courage. To protect the nation they love, our veterans stepped forward when America needed them most. In answering history's call, our veterans earned the respect and admiration of a grateful nation. Our nation must keep our solemn promises to the brave women and men who have served our country. They gave their unwavering devotion to America. They were always faithful. And as they were, so must we be, always faithful. Semper Fi. Yesterday was the 243rd birthday of the Marine Corps. As a birthday tribute, and because our guest speaker is a former Marine, Sarah will now play the Marine Corps hymn. How'd she do, Stan? Did you do all right? Stan. Stanley. Did she do all right? Okay. I thought I'd ask my guest speaker. Our guest speaker today is Stanley Cobain. Stan was in the Marine Corps from 1948 to 1952 and attained the rank of sergeant. He served in the Korean War, where he was awarded the Purple Heart. The Korean War is also known as the Forgotten War. From 1950 to 1953, the United States joined with the United Nations forces in Korea to take a stand against a threat to democratic nations worldwide. At the end, 1.5 million veterans returned back to the United States. To these veterans and our guest speaker, the Korean War would never be forgotten. Stan was among the first Marines to Korea and arrived there on August 3rd, 1950. He fought in the Battle of Pusan and was part of the first wave to land at Incheon. On September 26, 1950, he was on Hill 296, and his unit was under attack. Stan was wounded by a piece of shrapnel from a mortar round. "You hear a lot of them," he said, "but you never hear the one that gets you." Stan was paralyzed in all 4 limbs in what doctors described as a shock to his spinal cord. He eventually regained the use of his arms and legs after a long and hard struggle. It was nearly a year after being wounded before he could walk again. After leaving the military, he worked for Ozark Airlines and then started an air freight business now owned and run by family members. In 2003, he moved to Chatham. It is my distinct honor to welcome and to introduce to you our guest speaker, Stanley Cobain.
Good morning. What a nice turnout. I'm not a preacher, I'm not a politician, nor am I a public speaker, but I am a veteran. As we heard earlier, today is the 100th anniversary of World War I, where something near 5 million men and women of America served their country and now can be called veterans. It is important that we honor all of our veterans, no matter when or where they serve. There are veterans in the Chatham Police Force, there are veterans in the Chatham Fire Department, and there are veterans serving the management of the village of Chatham. There are veterans serving the country in many ways, including the county sheriff's department. My wife and I have lived here in Chatham for more than 15 years. Veterans love their country. Veterans put their personal lives on hold while they serve. Veterans understand a system of command and follow orders and come home to be great citizens. Many veterans can transfer their newly learned skills to new jobs at home.
I think you missed it. You've got 2 pages on that last one, Stan.
This will be the first time I'm missing anything.
There you go.
In 2012, records show that nearly 10% of all businesses in the United States are owned by veterans who employ over 5 million employees. I personally started a new business in 1964, which still operates today with family members. As a veteran of the Korean War, the sights, the sounds, the smells of combat have never left. I can still see the beggars and the children crying along the sides of the dirt roads, some bandaged, some with splints, begging for a scrap of food. And let me go off script here a little bit. Looking at the girls that came in to this ceremony, walking from the southern part of Korea, from near Mason, going north to the front lines, returning to the front lines really, and hearing the artillery booming in the distance. We were walking along a narrow dirt road in 2 lines, one line of Marines on each side of the road, our M1 rifles loaded and locked, and slung over our shoulders. But coming south on the same road were peasants, lots of them, not moving very fast, not carrying very much. It was in the middle of August of 1950, and it was hot. Nearly 100 degrees every day, and some days over 100. We had, on several days, as many casualties from the heat as we did from the enemy. These peasants that came south, all of them are dressed in white, or nearly white, dirty white, stained, horrible looking clothing. I'm not sure what you would call it, but to me it was rags, white rags. Some of the people had a small, what they called a Y frame, and had a baby in the back on a frame. Some of them had slings on their fronts with small babies in them, shuffling along. Most of them wore a molded rubber shoe. I don't know what they call it today. Walking up this road and seeing these peasants come south, there was a little child standing in the middle of the road. And it was about the size of the smallest girl that's standing down here. She was crying and had her hand out, begging. I can still see that girl today. I walked by her, I had nothing to give. We were living on sea rations, and I had nothing to give. And I walked by her 15, 20 feet, and I turned around, and she was still standing there with her hand out, tears running down her face, crying, no shoes, her feet were filthy. I'll never forget that. I've been in the VA program since 1952, and I've often wondered where I would be today if it was not for the VA programs. Most of the VA employees are veterans, including doctors and nurses. And to paraphrase General Douglas MacArthur, Marines never die, they just fade away. Thanks, and drive home safely.
Thank you, Stanley. As we gather here on Veterans Day, similar events are being commemorated in other countries where today is still known as Armistice Day, or as Remembrance Day, or as Poppy Day. The poppy, a bright red flower, became a symbol of veterans groups after a World War I battle in Belgium. The soil in the battlefields was rich with lime, and poppies thrived, creating a striking contrast between the rows on rows of white crosses and the vibrant red flowers. Major John McCrae, a Canadian surgeon, was moved by this sight, leading him to write one of the most memorable war poems, In Flanders Fields. Just certain individuals, not everyone. So, in Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place.
In the sky, the wires still bravely sing the clock. Scarce heard as the sun guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we were fell long, saw a sunset glow. Loved and were loved. And now we love.
Pick up our quarrel with love.
Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us, God, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow.
Thank you. I readily admit that I'm partial to a particular group of veterans. My father was one of them. In a radio address to the nation, President Franklin Roosevelt described the service members who served in World War II as the pride of our nation, who struggled to preserve our civilization. They hold a cherished place in the history of the United States and in the memories of the people they liberated. With the greatest generation, those who served in World War II, their widows, please rise, raise your hand. Thank you. As a tribute to our veterans of World War II, Sarah is now going to play Going Home. Thank you, Sarah. Today, as we recall the service of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen, we salute those who have served freedom's cause. We thank the current members of our armed forces, and we honor the men and women who left America's shores but did not return. While Veterans Day is primarily a tribute to America's living veterans, we remember that great achievement has been accompanied by great sacrifice. To secure our freedom, many heroic service members have given their lives. Also, we must not forget a special group of veterans, those that are missing in action and unaccounted for. They deserve our best efforts and unwavering commitment to return them home. Normally, now would be the time that I would ask us to pause for a moment of silence to remember those who have served their country and are no longer with us today. But before I do, I would like to say a few words about one of those individuals. I've been doing this ceremony for many years. And for all those years, Carl Olson, a Navy veteran, was there in this audience. On December 31st, 2017, Carl passed away. When I first started doing this ceremony, he would come up to me afterwards and offer advice on how I could improve this ceremony. Ask the veterans to raise their hand, he said. Then the next year, ask the active duty to raise their hand. The following, ask the World War II veterans to raise their hand. And then ask their widows. He was always right about all of these suggestions. I always sought him out after the ceremony to see what advice he might have. He hadn't had too many suggestions for the past 5 years, so I guess I was doing okay. Or maybe he was just being kind. I know I will miss speaking with him after this ceremony today. So now, let us pause for a moment of silence to remember those who have served their country and are no longer with us today. While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear our allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. Please join me. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Bravo. So in closing, let us thank our participants, our Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, Brownies, and their leaders. Liam Lawless for his playing of taps. Sarah for the Marine Corps hymn, Going Home, and An Amazing Grace. Our guest speaker, Stanley Cobain. Representing all of our nation's active duty forces today, the Color Guard from the Chatham Coast Guard, Bosun Mate 2, Robert Fluke, Bosun Mate 3, Joseph Calisi, Seaman Pamela Baez, and Seaman Dylan Davis. The Coast Guard Auxiliary. representatives from our police department, our fire department, and our Board of Selectmen. Our veterans and our veteran organizations, the Chatham VFW, the American Legion, and their color guard. One moment before we do the final conclusion, everyone just keep sitting still. I'm going to ask the veterans, when we're all done, if you would please come forward, and we're going to get a group photo. So don't go anywhere as soon as we're all over. And ladies and gentlemen, the departure of the color guard here will mark the conclusion of our Veterans Day ceremony. As custom dictates, please wait for the color guard to march away before you depart. And again, all veterans, please come up here afterwards so we can get a group photo. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. Thank you for joining us in our ceremony. And again, all veterans, please come up here so we can get that group photo. Thank you very much, folks. Have a great day.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars